Okay, at this time, I would like to call to order the Carson City Audit Committee meeting, and could we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Bertrand.
Here.
Member Bagwell.
Present.
Member Byrne.
Here.
Member Leonard. Here. Quorum is present.
All right, thank you. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Audit Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in the committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on an agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken on a matter raised under public comment unless the item has been specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Is there any members of the public here today? Yes, not, so, okay. Item number 4, approval of minutes. I have a motion on the approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes of August 9, 2016.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Item number 5, adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda for today?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, agenda adopted. Okay, item number 6 on our agenda. What we'll do is we'll start with, I guess we'll just break these up into each item. Starting with 6A, it's Moss Adams. Mark Strenka is going to be speaking to us about the audit committee regarding the current work program, going over that with us and give us an opportunity to ask any questions on that before we then move to the next item. Mark, it's yours.
Sounds good, Mr. Chair. Mark Strenka from Moss Adams. Good to see you all and see the snow. And I have to say, though, the last couple of times I came here, I must come down, Main Street, and then I turn left on Williams, right? And I haven't seen the new sidewalk and everything. It looks so good, doesn't it? Yes. And I know you probably don't feel like it was quick, but it feels like it was done quickly. Yeah, yeah. But I think it looks great. I was like, wow. So anyway, I was smiling as I was driving through. Status report. So this is brief. So we have one current project right now, the Small Works Projects Review. We sort of midstream on that. We've worked with the Public Works Department to identify a sample set of projects. I think we're looking at 8, 4 of which were planned projects, 4 of which were unplanned projects. Looked at that from a list. Requested information about those projects. So basically we can look at the process by which they were considered, scoped, and carried out. And so I think it was last week that we received the information on each of the projects, so we're going through that now, and I'm sure by the next time we meet we'll come back with our report on that. So that's moving smoothly. What else to update you on? 2 upcoming projects will be the procurement testing and IT controls testing starting in December, thereabouts in January respectively. Certainly everything's kind of within budget of activities that are going on and expected to continue that way. In terms of an update on the ethics or fraud hotline, there have been 2 reports since we last met, and actually both reports were on the same item, which was an item that we were able to forward to management. It was something that was appropriate for management sort of action, and that was taken and sort of closed, so that process worked good. We knew who to send it to. They took care of it right away and addressed. It wasn't an item of fraud, waste, or abuse, or at least I would say not at the level warranting us getting involved more. It was, I consider, more of a personnel issue, but within one of the departments. I know you want to hear more, don't you?
Yeah. I don't want names or anything like that.
No.
The magnitude of it. Was it?
No, so use of city resources, I'll say for personal use. And so it was promptly addressed and taken care of. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that doesn't, it would be silly for us to do an investigation over that, right? It's something that could be brought to the right person's attention, dealt with, and it was. So that's great. And
then I take it by saying that the magnitude the
Right.
dollar value, if we were to put a dollar value, is probably quite small.
Very small.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, immaterial, but it was against policy, so it was addressed. Okay? And that is, and again, just as a reminder, who was I just going through this conversation with? Some other city I was at last week, and they were talking about sort of fraud hotline activity, and kind of just as a reminder, it kind of breaks down of rough numbers, 40 to 45% are things that have nothing to do with the city, and another 40 to 45% are things like this, which are the city would be interested in, but things for management to address, right? Not something for internal audit. And then you get a very small percentage of things that sort of rise to the occasion of your internal auditor actually pursuing. And sometimes that's just you pursue, and then it still gets addressed by management, or, and then even a smaller set where you pursue and you say, okay, this is something that we really need to, quote unquote, investigate as something that's potentially fraud, waste, or abuse. And so it continues to, I'd say, sort of fall in the norm.
So,
Yeah.
do you actually then look at the value of that to determine whether you investigate more to see if it's broader? I mean, it starts out, maybe it's I'll just pretend,
Yeah.
they took home a ream of copy paper type thing or used it for personal and copied off recipes, who knows?
Yeah, this would have been more like, to use your sort of, it'd be more like I was using a shovel. Or maybe more than that, but I was using something on my own time versus just using it on company time, on work time, exactly. Versus using up a resource like a ream of paper, you would have been using something up. And so you go through all sorts of considerations when things come in, the magnitude of it, the risk or exposure to the city, which might not be a lot in dollar amount, but could be a lot in political capital, right? Make you look bad. Or somebody gets hurt, right? All sorts of things that aren't, necessarily current out of pocket cost. But something like this, which again, it was more not following a policy, but you want that nipped in the bud, for that, and then by making the appropriate sort of management aware of it, then it's their duty to make sure, okay, is this not something that's wide or spread? So, I'd like to use the small works as an example. So let's say we got a handful of different reports of a similar nature. Then we might say, oh, this is something that seems to be happening. Maybe we need to do a project focus on this, kind of like we did with the small works. Now, small works was one that we kind of wanted to do from early on, so it wasn't an aberration, but we kind of used some of those reports coming in as a catalyst to do it. And so that's a good mechanism too, just like, when we talked at the very beginning of being able to, we were having this discussion with another city also, of being able to use performance metrics as another sort of input of things you might consider in an internal audit program. You see, well, we're not operating as well as we want to in this particular area. Might that be a reason to scope a project to take a look? So you can have all sorts of inputs. Question? You look like you're ready.
How do you check for personal usage of computers and electronic type gear?
So the typical way you would do that, and some cities do that, they'll load software on the laptops and computers and can actually monitor that. And that would be the most typical way. That's not a lot of organizations do that, but that's typically how they'll do it. They'll actually do that through IT and do some monitoring, and sometimes you find out some interesting things.
Yes, when we first got PCs, you don't need to know this history, but a couple of the salespeople very quickly got a golf game. Yeah. And they had a lot of fun playing golf on when they were supposed to be working.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually not something that we tend to get pulled into. It really does tend to get addressed through IT. Now, sometimes that might percolate up through internal audit, like through a hotline, and someone might say, hey, look at, 3 people in my group are, on the internet all the time. And I don't know that internal audit's necessarily, it certainly could be the best or most constructive place to do that, but like I said, usually they're loading software on the network and they're just monitoring.
Don't you think it's actually the safest way for employees to feel they can anonymously take care of an issue? Right.
Absolutely,
So I think
that's a good way. No, I
Yeah,
just meant
okay.
internal audit doing the follow-up, like looking into it.
Right.
Yeah, it usually ends up being an
Okay.
IT.
But I do think it's good for employees to
Yeah.
have somewhere that they feel safe in divulging activity that's not appropriate, and that they feel safe for their jobs and no retribution, so.
Exactly.
I like it for that.
Yeah, when I was having a discussion with one of our, I was talking to an external attorney for a client who was looking into something that was generated through a hotline call, and this particular attorney, who happens to work for a firm who's the outside city attorney, so they've outsourced that. And it was interesting, she was saying she's not a big fan of hotlines, but mainly because you can end up having to look into things where someone, doesn't leave any mechanism to follow up with them. They've seen something, reported something, heard something, they say it, they're anonymous, and so sometimes you might spend time on something that might be frivolous or untrue. And I said, yeah, that's, there's a balance in everything, and fortunately for us, that particular one was something because of who was involved, and they kind of felt like they had to see it through, even though they had a strong suspicion and I think validated that there was nothing there. But most of the time, you're able to deal with things that are of like a personnel nature through HR or through management, and so that the hotline mechanism works in that way, that it doesn't create a whole bunch of extra work. Yeah. So anyway, what else? What else can I share with you? I think that was it. I mentioned obviously the hotline. I don't think I have anything else to update.
Okay, then with that, if you can go on, next item on the agenda, 6B, is going through the audit findings and tracking report.
Absolutely. So, hopefully it printed out. I'm sure it's still a little bit hard to read, right? If it looks like mine, you might have to get your glasses out. So let's start with the summary page, which I think is page 12 in your packet. So you see there are 4 findings that were completed since we last met, 3 on the internal controls review, and 1 under the performance measures development. Actually, when we were, Nancy helps with updating this from management perspective, and you sent it, and I was like, oh, they did the performance measures last time we met. So obviously, because that was presented to the audit committee. So you see then, if you turn the page to page 13, you're going to see that there are still 2 remaining open items for the community facilities. You have on page 14, 1 remaining on the employee efficiency study. And then if you go to internal controls on pages 15, 16, 18 through 18, we've got the first, on page 15, the first 3 were completed. And of those, the bottom 2 were the 2 that you had asked us to validate, and actually had validated, I think prior to when we last met, but we didn't, or maybe it was just after. But anyway, those were validated through the payroll testing process. And then, or the discussion that we were having a little bit before the meeting started on pages 16, 17, and the top one on 18, those are all cash handling related findings and recommendations from the internal controls review. So when we get to the next item, when Nancy goes through the cash handling policies that she's going to present, you'll see that that has linkages, as noticed in the status comments, to a number of these. One of them it'll address fully, because one of these, if I can re-find it. One of them is, I believe, strictly a policy development recommendation, and the others are various activities that will be supported by an updated policy. And so then the other thing that we were talking about was, should the, we call them observations, but should the observations or recommendations from the cash handling review, which was kind of the deeper dive specific to cash handling that we presented last time we met, or it was May or June, so I can't remember which meeting, whether all those observations or recommendations should be added to this report. And I think I would say normally yes, but they're really subsets of the cash handling findings and recommendations that are in here on pages 16, 17, and the top of 18. So I'm kind of thinking, I'm not sure that we necessarily need to add them because they're covered, and as these are covered, those will be addressed. Either way is fine, but maybe just in the interest of not adding more that are going to probably feel like duplication.
So can I clarify? Do you
Sure.
mean item 22 through 30 will be handled, will encompass in those policies all the other recommendations?
Yes, yes, yes.
So if we like the results and validate those for 22 through 30, we will have achieved the
Yes.
cash handling section.
Yes, exactly, yep. They're just a lot more detail on these, where this will say you need to right, exactly, yep. So I think that's it on the audit findings tracking update.
Okay, well, is there a motion to accept the recommendations for the projects to close, which is the 3 findings in the internal controls review and also the finding completed for the performance measures development?
I so motion.
Do you have a second?
What do you mean by closure of the?
Well, what we're going to do is, here, these items are the things that we're going to take them off our list and move them to,
No, we haven't had, wait a minute. Okay. No, I'm not ready. Hold on. I need a second.
what the recommendation is on these items, looking at those, if we don't have any more questions or concerns and we feel like we're satisfied on those 4 items, the recommendation or the motion would be to close those and take them off the list.
Okay, so there's 3 findings you're talking about in internal controls review.
Right.
Okay, that's what I want to get to. So you're trying to close 2, 8, and 14? Is that what you're? That is correct. I mean, we need to be.
Right, and 2 of those have been validated, is basically what we're saying.
That we talked about last time, and we just asked you to validate that the
Yeah.
activity happened. So
Right.
then the other one is review hours recorded in the high level, and you completed that, and that's a validated. Okay, so we're moving for, I know you had it on the summary, but not, okay, so 2, close. Oh.
Yeah, sorry, the numbers on the summary,
Okay, need a pen.
sorry about that.
Broke. Okay, so we're 2, 8, and 14 to close, and then we're looking
Performance measures.
performance measures.
Implementation of the executive dashboard.
That's on page 20. And that was simply, implement and execute a dashboard of KPIs, which they presented to you, yes.
Okay, they created it.
So let me ask the question again. Do we have a motion to close those 4 items that Moss Adams recommends be closed?
Yes, I move that we close those 4 items.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a second?
Now I'll second it.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to see a 4.
Now, is there any more discussion on that? Any discussion? I guess we did our discussion beforehand. All right, with that, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Yeah, sorry, I needed it to be clear it was.
No, that's good. Okay, moving on to item 6C, it's for discussion only. I guess it's Moss Adams at this time. Mark Stranka is going to, I guess, give us a discussion or a draft on the cash handling policy and procedures developed by the city. Well, Nancy's going to be presenting that. You're on, Nancy. Oh. And Nancy's passing it off, okay, to Gail. Huh? Okay.
It's a hot potato.
All right, there it goes. Boom, boom,
I'm gonna
boom.
introduce it. All right, Nancy Paulson, Chief Financial Officer for Carson City. So the Treasurer's Office developed the citywide cash handling policies and procedures, and after our discussion today, staff would make any necessary changes, and then the next step is to add this policy into the city's policy program, Policy Tech, and then that will send it through the review process of various department directors, and the DA, and then with final approval of the city manager. And Gail Robertson is here from the Treasurer's Office to, I think, give just a summary of the policy.
Well, Moss Adams presented their report earlier in the year, I think it was in May, and they gave us sample policies. So we took a look at the sample policies, we took a look at the report that they have with the findings that they came up with, and tried to address all of that in this cash handling policy. This particular handling policy is for the whole city, so it doesn't get into the details of what certain departments would have to do. They will have to develop their own more detailed things because the departments just do a lot of things differently, have a different need for, like some don't even handle cash so much, and others, like the pool or the MAC or something has a lot of cash going through it. Maybe just questions now, or do you want me to go actually through what it says?
Yeah, maybe just to highlight some of the key changes here. I mean, we got the policy modifications, item number 4. Could maybe just briefly explain that to us?
That's the part that says that every policy's individual policy, every department's policy has to follow this. And if they don't stick exactly with what is in here, like if they're asking for variance, they have to come to the Treasurer's Office and we'll review it and decide if they can do it differently. That was something that your committee itself had recommended back in May, that when we write the policy, that we include a process so that they could perhaps have some modifications.
So that part accounts for the differences between the different departments. So you have to follow this guideline unless you have an approval because you have a specific. So like, they might not have a place to put the safe, or they might have different cash handling. They do stuff over the weekend at a, softball tournament. There might be some dual counting requirements or things that you would have to approve for any variance then. Okay. And then, can I ask then, Gail, is there a process that, so let me just ask this differently. So let's say there's a tournament on a weekend. How do you know that the cash was actually deposited? How do you know the entire cash take wasn't taken?
Right. That would be a modification they would have to be asking for, because the policy says if they have over $300, it needs to be deposited the next working day, is what it says. So that actually, so that cash would be out there, say it's out at Centennial Park for the weekend.
No,
It would have to be locked up?
Yeah, that's not really what I'm after. One of the things I was thinking of when we were putting all these together, is there someone in the Treasurer's Office or the Finance Department that has the list of scheduled events through Park and Recreation? So you know that there's ice skating that happens during this time to this time, and there's, like I said, softball tournaments, and there's this at Governor's Manor, whatever. But is there anybody that's doing the actual spot check that every event was deposited? That you didn't lose an entire, nothing?
The finance department's not doing that. Assuming that it's probably done at the department level, the department director. but I'm not sure that the treasurer's office is confirming, against what the activities are.
Well, and that brings up, so, especially at these events, if you have one person taking it, is there a procedure requiring there's at least two people to look and count, and there's a verification that way, or is that not really included in the policies and procedures?
We've tried to do that, to say that somebody has to make the deposit, somebody else reports it, somebody,
Well, I'm thinking about when it's the collection, because, somebody can write, somebody can, there's a custody, because somebody can just right out there at the event, pocket the entire thing or half of it, and there's.
Every other 20, yeah.
Yeah, so what are the controls so that when that's taken, there's a requirement of two people, and there's some kind of documentation of initialing that this person counted and verified, and the other person then takes it and then has it then sent off to be deposited? Because I didn't really see that in here, and I was wondering if that's something that would have been considered. Is that just not practical? And if that's not practical, I guess the next thing would be who would be kind of looking to kind of like monitor what kind of cash typically comes from these events, and if they see a discrepancy or an anomaly based on past receipts from an event, that would trigger an investigation or taking a look at it, to follow up. So that's the one hole I see in this. I was wondering if that's being addressed, or if there was a reason why the custody of the cash is not discussed in here.
well, I know typically you would require that anyone collecting the cash has to give a receipt to the person, and then we would have a copy of the receipt, and so that way you would know that all the money that was receipted came in. But, yeah, you could always have somebody kind of going around that system.
So are you saying it's just not practical to have another person there? You can't have two people?
No, we can have two people there,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
I think the Parks Department has procedures in place. I'm just not sure right now what exactly those are. I'd have to get information from the Parks Department.
So maybe just as a thought, and we can just toss it around, doesn't mean it's the right answer, but potentially for those that have events and take large amounts of cash, maybe the treasurer's office, the finance combination or whatever, would just like the manager to send you a report every quarter that says, I have reviewed the cash deposits and determined that all special events had a deposit. Because what I'm concerned about is the entire deposit doesn't make it there. And that's how you don't know about it. Because you don't have a record, you don't have a receipt, but it would be nice. It sounds wonderful to think that management's just going to know and they're going to see a number. They're not going to notice the number's off by $500, but they would notice if they looked at their list of events and said, wow, we didn't make a deposit on Monday or Tuesday following the racquetball tournament out at Centennial. Where's the snack bar money? So I'm just saying, as a compensating control, you're not going to put two people out at a small event maybe, but you can at least make sure cash was deposited or something.
I think that's great. And so I kind of view this as kind of like how we handle expense reports for our team. So they either funnel through me as to review them as they're being submitted for payment within our firm, or we get a monthly report with all of them, and then I need to look at them. So I take the former, because I'd rather look at them as they come in versus this huge list that I really can't make any sense of at that time. But that's like a central check, right, for certain things. So having the departments be able to say, yeah, we had these events, just like you said, we have receipts for them, and then that accounts for are we counting for the events that do happen? And then the other part of it then is doing those spot checks. Some will have two people there, and I'm sure some won't have two people there. And so it's someone within the city periodically saying, okay, well, let's go check an event. Or you have, like we talked about previously, you have a rotation of having someone different. You swap out and see if you get any different results. So that.
7,000 and we normally only have two.
Right, the classic, this employee can never take a vacation when that thing is happening. We just went through this with one of our other clients. Well, actually, two of them just finished doing cash handling, and we had it was citywide, so it was kind of the step before this one, and had the debrief with the various departments of, okay, here are all the things that we found that we can't put in the report because we can't make them public, and a lot of it, they weren't shocked, but they had no idea, right, that those things, so they're like, oh, okay, we got to tighten this up, this up, this up. And that's not like shame on you. It's just that stuff can happen, and you just have to be a little bit more diligent about it. So anyway, so I think the reporting on part of it, and then just the spot checking of events here and there, so that you're getting that, not just did we get the whole receipt, did we get a full receipt, right?
Yeah, and I guess if it's clear that somebody's got to be responsible for watching that, a department head, and it's going to be different in different places. Like in some cases, they'll say, like, we got one person, but they're watching it closely. They're talking with them. They know what they can expect. How many people were there? And then if it's $20 a head, then they can almost calculate with that. And so somebody else other than, if it's unpractical in some case to have two people there, somebody else is going to be. I guess what I'd like to see is that other person that's signing off on it then gets that receipt and then signs off on that and saying, hey, I'm the department manager and I looked at that and this makes sense that we brought in $15,000. Yeah. So otherwise, we got the problem, as Lori said, the deposit doesn't make it, but we got the other problem that half the deposit makes it. And a lot of times I've seen a lot of frauds that they just take a little bit at a time, and then the way it gets under the radar, and but that little bit becomes a large amount, and in a particular department or event, it becomes material to that department. So I don't know if you take those recommendations or somehow incorporate that in here, but I'm thinking that the cash custody at the lowest level is the thing that we probably need to shore up with our controls and our procedures, but at the same time have enough flexibility so each department can do it differently, but there's still an accountability.
Part of what we put in this was because right now in some departments, they're sharing the cash drawer, lots of employees, and you can't tell. If something does happen, you don't have the accountability of who may have done it or not done it. So we're recommending that everybody have their own cash drawer, that it's locked, and if they do have to share it, like between shifts, that it has to be balanced between each shift. And then also, each department someone in each department signs off on a revenue report twice a month. So maybe you want us to have them look at it a little more closely and attach something that says, because it's just reporting that what they are thinking they received made it to the bank. But
Yeah.
It sounds like you're looking for something more that.
Yeah, and I think it'd be neat if they just wrote like a sentence or so, because it's very easy for them to just boom, initial, and that's it. It's just they just did the check off, and something that really, if it's a manager that's looking at, it's a matter of say, hey, I looked at this, and it's a matter of I expected X amount of people to be there, and this is reasonable. So it's almost like just writing it out, so they don't just check off the list and let that go, but it's forcing them to have to stop and think about it. And then if there ever is a problem, you've got a written narrative. You can go back and say, hey, what's happening here. So I think that we do want something just a little bit more, because this is such an important area, and it's so important to catch the issue right here at this level.
Cash handling should take a very, shall I say, extreme amount of internal control policy. If you're going not to have two people at an event, okay, but you need to be looking at the size of the event and how much cash it generates, and make damn sure you got two people there. And just because someone's on vacation or the baby is sick doesn't mean that you can't get a second person there. And it's extremely important that you have two people looking at cash, and you get neat little surprise audits once in a while to make darn sure that your internal control policies are being followed. This is one that is extremely, extremely important, and boy, people get into cash. I know from experience that it happens.
We do have a part in here that does say that the treasurer's office will do surprise visits to make sure that policies are being followed correctly. But
That means you're going on the weekend during the tournament when they're selling beer?
No, none of it has started, but we can.
That's where all the money is.
I know. All right. Yeah.
And how much beer does a checker get?
Yeah.
It also says in here that cash operations must be subject to daily supervisory review. So that's kind of an answer to the prior.
Okay. Is there a process in place, or would that probably be at the department or management level, to check that actual daily process is being performed?
Yeah, most of those detailed processes are all at the department level. Because,
Okay.
you know, the courts have cash handling, they have their sets of procedures, and it's probably a little different for parks since they're out at different sites and
Is there procedures in place for the people that, that have a heavy, their cash handling is extensive? Is that at the hiring, or is there some sort of bonding going on, or anything that you guys do, anything, or background checks or anything on employees who do extensive cash handling?
I think all employees have background checks, but they're not bonded.
Okay.
I think that the two other opportunities here, and I think they're reflected in our internal controls reviews, so this is that classic, I was just doing a webinar the other day, it was this week, whatever, what's today? Wednesday? I guess it was Monday. And they were asking what were the biggest risks with cities, with municipal governments. And I said, well, the general answer is the decentralized versus centralized activities, right? And so this is one of those. So centrally, you can't be everywhere and do this all. But what you can do is have policy for procedures and process, not just sort of say that there need to be at the department level, but get proof of it. So I think that that's an appropriate role for centrally finance or the treasurers to review, to make sure that something does exist and it meets your standard of what that should be. And then the other thing I think is then training. The opportunity for centralized training for decentralized activity so that, we can go through and say, okay, well, so this is how we would expect that this would happen. Because you're still going to, even if you have this in place, there's going to be variation, and people who are more or less, Catherine, to your question, experienced at this and
They see out these jobs.
right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe just as an idea then, where you have the cash operations must be subject to daily supervisory review, would it be possible to add something into this policy that you've approved what that review is? So what I don't want to happen is, again, they say, I'm in compliance, you said daily supervisory review. We do it. Do you want to see what their daily supervisory review process is, and that you would help them maybe design the form, design the report? Does that make sense? That portion, they have to do it, but it would be different department by department. If they only take in $50 a day, their daily supervisory review might be, we made sure $50 cash was deposited every day. But if it's Parks and Rec, it might be, oh no, we verify the amount of beer purchased, the remaining beer on hand, and did we sell enough that accounts for the amount of beer? So if we maybe just compromised and had it that you actually reviewed what that process is, and you could make it more formal or less formal, depending upon the department, but not leave that subject to their.
I think looking down the road, when we come back and we have someone come in and audit and look at this, we just want to make sure that there's documentation that's auditable. So when you go through and do the audit, there's something there you can look at to show that procedure was, because if they say supervisory review, it could be like, yeah, I reviewed it, but there's no documentation, there's nothing. Or like I said, if they have to write out a sentence as to what they did, that might be good. So I guess we just want to make sure there's something incorporated. This is an auditable policies and procedures, because if we don't have it auditable, then there's, it's just hard to go back and check it. The purpose of all this is have something we can go back and check later.
Something like cash operations must be subject to daily supervisory review on a form approved by the treasurer's office.
That's good.
comfortable that, again, we're tightening up and
Yeah. That's
putting a
good.
compensating control can be harder or less based on the department.
And then the good thing about that is it probably would be good in not too far into the future to kind of actually do a bit of an audit to kind of go through and see how that all looks, and if you see any holes. So here we've done an audit. This has come out of that, and then a matter of auditing to make sure the procedures are adequate and there's no holes in it. Then hopefully at that point it's going to, then it would be really tight. And so I'm kind of guessing that maybe a year down the road we'd want to maybe have something of another audit to take a look and see, see what it's not a very intense audit, and it's not looking at the controls, but just checking the procedures and see where it is. Because some departments will probably be better than others. That's where we'll then find out where the problems are. So, yeah, good.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's when you can go do your unannounced cash counts and things like that. And which are always fun.
I have one comment on this. When they want proposed changes, it says, assure that strong internal controls will remain within the proposed changes. A lot of times people find an internal control item sort of frustrating and irritating to have to comply with. You need to make sure that if you approve some change to internal control, that it doesn't really end up giving the potential for some real nasty violation of our rules. Internal control is a pain in the butt to a lot of people, and we just have to make sure that they're very strong and they don't disappear just because it's inconvenient.
Any more comments on the cash handling? Okay. Well, this is not an item, we need to make a motion on, this is a discussion only, but thank you, Gail, for your input on that. Thank you, Mark, for what you guys put together. And like I said, I'm going to be kind of curious to see maybe a year from now to see, after another review of it, to see how it all comes out.
What's the next, is there a next step on the cash handling? Does it come back to us to approve, and then we'll clear all those other items on the tracking, and then recommend to the board to close the cash handling?
That's kind of,
We'll go to the board for approval of the policy, right?
the policies actually aren't approved by the board. Policies are approved by the city manager. So I was trying to figure out how to word this and, what exactly to do about closing out. I mean, I guess we could take it to the board to close out the findings.
Take it till that's why we're going
Right.
through this, so.
Yeah. So
Yeah, so
If
what I
you
would
make
suggest.
the amended change, it would go then to the city
Policy.
manager,
Yep.
and we're not going to clear these till we have an adopted
Right.
policy.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and then it can come back as this
Here's-
was in place.
And then
the
we
city
can
manager
clear
approves
these.
it, and you approve that it addresses the
Right.
findings and
Okay.
recommendations,
I
right?
just want to get everybody on the same
Yep.
sheet of the music, okay?
And this is, I just want to admit, I think this is great, this is great progress, and just so you know, and so we didn't do this, the city did, so not only I don't want to get credit for it, which I felt like you're giving me credit is also, but you don't want your internal auditor, it was mentioned, Gail mentioned, we gave an example, but, you don't want us writing the policy because then we'd be auditing our own work in that essence. But yeah.
We're really making progress,
Yeah.
on the tracking items, and so if we don't get a chance to say thank you to staff, all city staff that work so hard to help us clear these, because I think they do recognize we can always get better. It's not an I gotcha, it's how do we do it better? And so just a big shout out to everyone that works so hard on these. Thanks for the good job, Gail, and I'm sure you had some staff help, so please pass that on.
Yes, I'll just make a comment on that. I was amazed at some of the first meetings when I saw Audit findings dating clear back to 2012. And I was very pleased to see that stuff finally get resolved and disappear. It's very, very important. And history, as an ex-controller, if I let an audit thing remain outstanding for about 2 months, I was in trouble. So you guys have done a good job getting a bunch of that solved.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to move on to agenda item number 7. Public is invited, but we have no public, so I'm just going to pass over that and ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, before we do that, we got to set a date for our next meeting.
There you go.
And before we do that, Mr. Stranka, I guess when do you think would be a good time? I guess in talking with some of the others, it seems like possibly February might be a good time. We're looking at some of the things that are going to be coming completion, that by February we should probably be at a point where we have enough to discuss.
Agreed. January, February. February's probably, I'd probably take the latter of the 2 months. So yeah, so February.
I was thinking February 14th, Valentine's Day. Yeah, 14th. That is Valentine's Day, right? Okay.
When do the new members get
There's
elected?
There's a debt management commission meeting on that day at 1:30.
How long do those typically take?
5 minutes? No.
Well,
So
yeah,
we'd
no.
probably be good if we did it at 3 or 3:30.
Yeah. I was going to
Okay.
say.
Do it, what,
We don't, we,
pick another day.
no, that's fine.
Oh, that day? That'll be good.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that basically that's a meeting that usually doesn't take very long, so it shouldn't be a conflict.
Unless we're issuing debt. We're not.
Okay, well then, is that good for everybody? February 14th, is that clear on everybody's calendar? And then with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
A second?
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned. See you on the 14th.
You didn't ask if we were all in favor.
I kind of assumed that, but just to make sure the DA is happy with. Is that all in favor? Say aye. Aye. Opposed?